Hello Labbers! Welcome to another preschool project video. So we're officially done with our reading unit. It went by super fast, and we're going to move on now to talking about goals, and then next week we'll talk about data, and then we'll talk about behavior management for the 2 weeks after that. There is some construction going on outside of my apartment right now, so if you do hear some noise in the background, I'm sorry about that, but nothing you can do, right? Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about with goals is how to read a goal. I know that the first time you start reading actual speech language pathology goals, it can feel really overwhelming because it's really wordy and sometimes hard to break up. I know that I personally, when I first started reading goals, I would just be like, oh my gosh, what is this even saying? Like, there's so many words, none of them fit together. But then now that I have more experience with reading and writing goals, I can see a goal and immediately know exactly what I need to be doing with that student. So my goal for you guys is that you guys become more confident and used to reading and writing goals, because that'll make it easier when you walk into Rosa Parks or in the future, if you do work with clients, you'll be able to read the goal and feel more confident in your ability to help them. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the parts of a goal. So the first part of a goal is going to be when it's done by. So it's always going to start off by by December 31st or by the end of the academic year, right? You want to set a time frame for it. In the school system, it's often going to be by whenever the IEP is due. So whenever if the first IEP was written on the 12th of September, then every IEP in the future will likely be about the 12th of September, because that's when they get reevaluated every year. The who is going to be the student or client, patient, if you're in a hospital setting. The what is kind of a loaded question, right? So it's going to be what you're expecting them to do, what they need to do to get out of services, and what prompting you're giving them. And then the how is how they're going to do the what. So that also goes in a little bit with prompting. And it's also going to talk a little bit about the delivery mode. So if you're saying, oh, they're going to make 2-word phrases independently, right? So the how would be independently, or while reading a book, while reflecting about a book, right? So it'd be make 2-word phrases is the what, and the how would be while reading a book independently, right? So this kind of breaks it down a little bit further. I know when I first moved to this slide, a lot of you probably were like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And this was made by not the language facilitator, by the preschool project coordinators last year, Haley and Leilani. And Haley was so proud of this slide, so I had to include it. I also really love it because she broke apart exactly what to include in a goal and then color coded it. So here, the purple part, the by May 2020, is the date in which the goal should be, by which the goal should be accomplished. The orange is the level or type of prompting, right? So given no more than 2 prompts, verbal or visual cues. And this could say a lot of different things. It could say independently, with moderate prompts, with maximal prompts, with minimal prompts. It could list an exact number, like here it could say 2 prompts, but whatever it is that you're saying, you need to define that, okay? Because a word like minimal or maximal could be really subjective. So my definition of minimal might be totally different than Erin's. And so we want to define it so that if I was sick and Erin was being my sub, she could read my goal and know exactly what I count as like a minimal prompt. And usually that's going to be defined by how many and what type. So here you can see that this clinician has described 2 prompts, how many, and then the type is verbal or visual. So a visual cue would be like me pointing to something, and a verbal cue could be me saying, move your tongue back, or it could be me saying, like, oh, don't forget your strategy. One visual cue that I use a lot for little kids with our tic problems, which are not the kids we're talking about at Rosa Park, this is just an example, is like visual phonology, right? So if you're making like an S sound, you might drag your finger up your arm like a snake. If you're making an SH sound, you might make like a quiet lady symbol, like shh, right? And so that's a visual cue of, oh, this is the sound you're making, but I want you to make this sound, right? And so usually in that case, like that visual cue is less of a prompt than me telling the student, oh, your tongue, you're making the SH sound, you need to be making S, move your tongue forward. That's really specific. So that's going to be a a easier clue for them than me just going, right? Because I'm not making the sound, I'm not telling them how to make the sound, I'm just giving them that clue of, oh, you're making the wrong sound, this is the one I want. And they have to remember what the symbol means, what sound is paired with the symbol, and what sound is not paired with the symbol, because that means they're making the wrong sound, right? And then they have to fix it themselves. So that's going to be more of like a minimal prompt, right? Because I'm not giving them a lot of help, I'm just giving them a little bit of a clue, versus maybe a moderate prompt would be me saying, okay, like move your tongue forward, like I'm hearing the SH sound. And then a maximal cue is basically like you're giving them the answer, right? You're giving them everything in you, all of the support you possibly could give them, you're giving them. So usually you're not going to see in a goal max prompts or cues, because that means you're basically doing it for the student. Like the student's not really doing it on their own. And we want to be always pushing the students towards independence. So usually you're only going to see like mod cues if it's like a very challenging goal, or if it's a kid with like severe special needs. And then usually you're going to see like minimal cues for most students, and that's usually defined as like 1 to 2 prompts. And then independent is 0 prompts, like you are not helping the child at all, you're not giving them any support, and they're able to do it all on their own. And so there's definitely like a wide array and a lot of gray space in between prompting, and we will get into that a little bit further, I believe, in these slides. But that's essentially the intro to prompting. Stay tuned. So in blue, this next part of the goal is the target that we want the student to accomplish, okay? So in this case, this is the what. So the student will use 2 to 3 word utterances to comment, label, express wants and or needs. Example, blue dog runs, car go. And so this is a pretty typical goal that you'll see, especially at Rosa Parks, right? So we're just wanting to expand how many words in a sentence they're using, and then we're defining like in what setting are they going to use the 2 words. So you could write, like I said on the last slide, like when responding to a question from a book, or when answering a WH question. But in this case, it is to comment, label, and express wants or needs. And so this is just commenting the blue dog runs. Car go could be maybe they are requesting, hey, I want you to make the car go. And so it leaves a lot of wiggle room. This next part, the green part, is opportunities, right? And so that's going to be like if I have 5 cards with vocabulary words and you're able to answer, like name 4 of the 5 cards correctly, that would be 4 out of 5 opportunities. In this case, it's a little bit more vague because it's hard to tell what an opportunity is to comment needs. And so I'll get into that a little bit further. It might even be next week that I talk about this. We'll have to see. And so that we'll talk a little bit more about how to know when an opportunity is an opportunity, right? This red part is when to take data on it. So here it says during dramatic play. You'll see that a lot in Rosa Parks. You'll see like during breakfast time or during dramatic play, during like small group reading or whatever. You might see this a little bit less often in like the clinic setting, but I have seen this a lot in the school setting. So they'll say like during a classroom activity or during a small group activity or during a speech therapy activity, right? So they're just kind of labeling like in what setting are you using, are you taking data on this, and are you practicing this skill? And the reason why that's so important to include is at Rosa Parks, obviously, it helps you guys know when to take data. But for when you're in the schools or the clinics, it's important because it lets you know when you need to generalize, right? So if you're only working on a skill in the like speech room, then sometimes the child will only pair successful use of that strategy in the speech room. And so once they can meet their goal in the speech room, then you're going to generalize. So you're going to say like in the lunchroom or in the classroom or in all settings, right? And so then the speech therapist might go along with the student to different classes, or if it's in the clinic, I know sometimes they'll take clients to like Starbucks or Trader Joe's and just practice their skills. So if they're practicing having a loud voice because they're really, really quiet and hard to hear, then maybe the clinician will take them to Starbucks, and which is kind of a noisy setting, and have them practice using their loud voice outside of the clinic. And so that's why you might specify setting, right? Because in the first goal, if you're using a loud voice in a silent speech room, that's a totally different goal than using a loud voice out in the real world at a really loud coffee shop, right? And then here we have across 3 consecutive sessions. And you're going to see this pretty much in every goal that you ever read. It's going to say like across 2 or 3 consecutive sessions. And the reason why is because a client might meet a goal one week, and that's awesome. That's like what we want to see, right? But just because you meet it once doesn't mean you actually get it. I've seen a lot of times where clients will like meet a goal and then the next week they'll drop back down a little bit, and then they'll meet the goal again and then they'll drop back down a little bit. And so by making them have to meet the goal like 2 or 3 sessions in a row, it's basically like them proving that they have mastered the skill, that they're not going to regress at all. They're going to continue growing on their own after you dismiss them from therapy. Because if you dismiss a child too soon from therapy and they're not able to generalize on their own, they might backtrack their progress a little bit, which will be sad and frustrating for the parents or the family members, caretakers, if it's an adult client. And so that's why we want to have it always be like across multiple sessions to prove that they're either staying steady or improving. And then pink is the means by which the goal will be measured. So usually it'll say like as measured by clinician data collection / observation. In this case, it's language facilitator because you guys at Rosa Parks are the ones taking the data, not us. And sometimes at the school, it'll say by teacher, collection, observation, or like psychologist, or whatever setting that the child might be in, where an adult might be taking data for the speech language pathologist or the speech language pathologist themselves. So let's read over this color-coded goal together now, and hopefully now that we broke it down a little bit, it'll make sense. So by May 20th, not May 20th, by May 2020, given no more than 2 prompts, example, verbal or visual cues, the student will use 2 to 3 word utterances to comment, label, express wants and or needs, example, blue dog runs, car go, in 3 out of 4 opportunities during dramatic play across 3 consecutive sessions as measured by language facilitator data collection / observation. And so even just reading that now, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so many words. It's so overwhelming. But if you can look at all the different parts, you know that it's just, you're going to be a dramatic play. You're going to make some opportunities for them to use 2 to 3 words, and you're going to check every time they use 2 to 3 words correctly, or X if they don't do it correctly. And just keep in the back of your head, like, oh, I can't give them more than 2 clues. Right? I call them clues instead of cues because if you're working with students, sometimes it's easier to use language that they understand. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, like, let me give you a clue. This character might wear a tiara, right? And so then the student can catch up on the word princess, and they know that you want something from them because you're giving them a clue. Okay. So an example broken down, I wrote this this really short goal just because I want you guys to be able to see the parts instead of all the wordiness of a real goal. So I'm just going to go through now and highlight this as needed. So first, let's do the purple. So the date by which the goal should be accomplished is going to be December 12th, 2020. So let's go ahead and make that purple. Oh, that's awful. I don't like that one bit. Okay, that's better. Emily, that's me. That's going to be the who, but I don't think that Haley included, okay. So Haley did not include the who in her color breakdown, so that's okay. It's just know that you have to include the individual's name in the goal. A lot of teachers will have a goal bank, and so they'll have like a whole list of this part of the goal, like the rest of it, and then they'll go through after looking at a student and be like, okay, like they need like a grammar goal, and they'll go through all their grammar goals and be like, oh yeah, that's a good one for them. And so they'll take that pre-written goal and they'll just add in the date and the name of the student. But if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that you actually read through the goal one more time, because I've seen in IEPs before, a teacher has taken a goal from a goal bank and it said like, so-and-so will initiate conversation with his peers, but it's a female student, right? And so it's important to make sure that the goal matches what you're trying to write. Even though goal banks are great, and I definitely recommend using them. So orange is the level and type of prompting. So let's go through and see if we can find that. Independently is what I chose. So that's going to be highlighted in orange. So Emily will independently what, right? The target skill. initiate conversations with a peer. It's going to be blue. And then the green is how often. So in this case, it looks a little bit different than the last slide, right? So the last slide, it was like in 3 out of 4 opportunities. You might see like something out of something. You might see a percentage, like an 80% of the time. 80 is pretty common, 80 and 90. In this case, it's a little bit different, right? So this is going to be 3 per day. Okay, so you can also take data this way. It does not have to be a certain percentage or blank out of blank. It could just be like a check mark, or like, did they do it once? Yes. Twice? Yes. 3 times? Yes. They're good. But if they only do it twice, then they did not meet the goal. Right? So you want to make sure that you are writing goals that are going to be challenging, that are going to take a little bit, but that the student is able to meet eventually. So here we have when to take data on the target skill. In this case, there is not that information, right? You could add it in. You could say like during breakfast time and make that the red, but it's not required. As you saw, like originally, I didn't think that needed to be put into the goal. So goals can be flexible depending on what you think needs to be included or not. But you do need like the major parts of like the date, the name, prompting. Okay, pretty much everything except for red. Light blue, how consistently. So this is over 3 consecutive school days. We're going to make that a different blue, I believe. Actually, let's make it this nice, like aquamarine blue. Okay, that's more gray, whatever. And then pink means by which the goal will be measured. So I didn't include that part, but I should have. As measured by clinician data. See, so I'm glad that we went over this together because I realized that I was missing a really important part of the goal, which is that I needed to write how it was going to be measured. And then I also was able to add during breakfast time, even though that doesn't really need to be in this specific goal. It could just be in any time at school that the clinician is measuring data. All right, so hopefully that helps. Being able to have a goal, highlight the different parts, and then you can understand when the goal needs to be completed by, who the goal is about, what you're asking them to do, and how you're asking them to do it. Going back to this slide, right? The when, who, what, and how, and then just color coding it. Maybe that'll help you guys out. So this is another example broken down just by the when, who, what, how. So the when is by December 12th, 2020. The who is Emily. The what is initiate 3 conversations with a peer. And the how is independently and over 3 consecutive school days. I think also we can include here as measured by clinician data, which we added on the last slide. All right. I just had like the worst feeling that I'm not actually sharing my screen, and I've been recording this for like hours, so hopefully this is going well and I don't have to redo this. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is how to write a goal. So I wrote down here, now that you know the parts of a goal, let's work on making our own. To make a goal, you have to have some kind of data. This can be from baseline testing or observational data, and we'll talk more about that next week. But for now, I'm just going to give you some examples, and we're going to use these to create a goal. So in this example, we have Sophie is 4 years old, and she's only using 2 words per sentence. And then in our second example, Juan is 3 years old and doesn't have any suffixes like ing, s, or ed in his language at all. Both of these are concerning, if you couldn't tell. And so these are goals that they would be getting services with a speech therapist. Let's go ahead and get into it. So our first goal is Sophie is 4 years old and she's only using 2 words per sentence. So let's pretend like today is her IEP day. So we would write, I'm pre-recording this video. So let's see, when am I gonna post this? On November 6th. So let's say by November 6th, 2021, right, next year, Sophie will, right, so we have our date and we have our client. That's how all goals are going to start off. So now we need to get into like level of prompting probably. But honestly, when I write a goal, I start off by writing what I want them to do, and then I go back and add the prompting and everything. So if I was writing this goal, I would say by November 6th, 2021, Sophie will combine 4 words in a sentence when commenting, labeling, / requesting with no more than 2 prompts, example, visual, verbal. Okay, I think I want to add in this specific example a context. I think that will be beneficial for data purposes. So by November 6, 2021, Sophie will combine 4 words in a sentence in, let's say, 4 out of 5 opportunities when commenting, labeling, requesting during meal times with no more than 2 prompts as measured by clinician data. Okay, so there you go. You got to see a goal being written real time. So here you can see that we have our date by November 6th, 2021. We have our person, Sophie. We have what we want her to do, combine 4 words in a sentence, right? She's only using two words now, so we want to increase that next year by 2 words per sentence. In 4 out of 5 opportunities. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about what opportunity means because that's kind of a vague term. When commenting, labeling, requesting during meal times, right? That's our context with no more than 2 prompts, visual or verbal, as measured by clinician data observations, okay? So that's including all of our different areas of the goal. I think we also probably could include in here over 2. So it seems wordy, but that's how goals are written. The problem is that they're SMART goals, so it has to be really specific for insurance purposes and also for a substitute and for any other professional viewing that goal, because all goals in like a school IEP setting are going to be written the same way. So the school psych and the teacher, like the SPED teacher, like they can all see your goal and understand exactly what you're working on with them, and that can help them take data in their own classes and in their sessions with the child. I know a lot of the times like OT, PT, and speech will kind of support each other a little bit. So maybe if the child is in occupational therapy and they're working on cutting something, maybe the speech therapist will be working on suffixes in this case. And while they're doing that activity, they'll have them be doing a craft, right? So maybe they'll have them do like 3 suffixes and then cut out a nose, and then do another 3 suffixes and cut out circles, and then do another 3 suffixes and cut out a scarf. And then at the end, the child can build a snowman, because then the child is getting practice with cutting, even though that's not like the overall goal, but it's still practice. And then the focus in speech therapy would be on the suffixes. And then the occupational therapist, when she's focusing on cutting and teaching the child how to cut, and the child says like, oh, I want to be cut or something, and be like, oh, that's a really bad example, because cut is an irregular past tense verb. I was going to say, like, if the child was just saying cut, but the word was cutted, then the occupational therapist could be like, oh, like, no, you cutted it. But obviously that's not correct, and I can't think of anything on the spot. So hopefully you understand what I mean by that, and if not, I'll think of something and include it in the email this week. Okay, so let's write another IEP. So by November 6th, 2021, because this is for next year, one will use suffixes in the appropriate context in 8 out of 10 opportunities with no more than 2 prompts over 3 consecutive sessions as measured by clinician data. All right, so here you see we have our date, we have our student, we have what we want them to do. So we want them to use suffixes. Here you might want to describe exactly which suffixes. So if you want to put exact, it would be IE. And if you want to put like, for example, like it could be this or this, but there's also other options, right? So the reason why I have here example, because I have example of visual or verbal, but it could be tactile or auditory, you know? So here I'm going to put IE because I want to list these are the specific 3 suffixes we're using. We're not focusing on any other suffixes, and that's ing, s, d. In the appropriate context, by that I mean, so this is an example, right? Let's see. There are 2 doves, right? Because you're using the S. In 8 out of 10 opportunities with no more than 2 prompts over 3 consecutive sessions as measured by clinician data. So I think that this is a decent goal. I don't think it's the best out there. The reason why is because there's multiple suffixes in there, and that can make taking data challenging, because what if in the 8 out of 10 opportunities, there's like 9 ings and 1 s, and maybe they are really sucking on ings, but they're doing great on s, then maybe the data isn't really reflective of what they're doing. So sometimes clinicians will choose just to focus on like 1 or 2 different suffixes, or they'll make specific goals for each suffix. But in this case, because he doesn't have any, I think it's fine. You'll also see this with like WH questions. You'll see it written like, so-and-so will answer WH questions correctly. And that is kind of the same feel as this goal because there's multiple types of WH questions. So maybe they're answering who questions 100% of the time and what questions like 0% of the time. So then it just gets kind of like fuzzy with the data. But as long as you are taking clear data for yourself, you can always explain that later on. So when you're writing the report, you can say, oh, like when they were using who, they did it 100% accuracy. When they were doing what, they did it with 80% accuracy. When they were doing why, they did it with 50% accuracy. So overall, like this goal is emerging. And then maybe for the next year's IEP, you would scrap the other WH questions and just focus on why, because that's where they're having trouble with now. So in this case, it might be a similar scenario, you know, like maybe we kind of introduce all of these suffixes and then we can write exactly how he's doing for each of them. And then next year we can kind of regroup and evaluate what we think he needs to be working on. And here in 8 out of 10 opportunities, for this goal, I feel like it's a lot more clear of what an opportunity is, because in the last one, it's like, oh yeah, they'll just like make 4-word sentences when they have an opportunity to. And in your head, you're like, well, don't they always have an opportunity to make a sentence? And here I feel like it's more clear because you could show like a storybook and be like, what is the boy doing? Or you could like show pictures and be like, what is the boy doing? And then they have to say jumping, versus what did the boy do yesterday? And then they would have to use ed versus ing, right? Or if you're using plural s versus possessive s, you could be like, this belongs to Sarah. The key is, and then they would have to say Sarah's. So that's a lot more clear of what an opportunity is because it's a lot more direct versus having a conversation and expressing your thoughts and wants and needs is more complex in understanding what an opportunity is. So I just want to take a moment. I've hinted at this a couple times, the difference between language and speech goals. And I think that this overall is the most misunderstood topic of language facilitators when they first come to Rosa Parks and of society in general, right? So most people, even other professionals like ABA therapists, right? When you say, hey, like I'm a speech therapist, they're going to say, okay, cool. So you work on the R sound. Or, oh, cool. Like I went to speech when I was a kid because I had a stutter. A lot of people don't understand that speech therapists work on so much more than just speech. They work on, that's why it's called a speech language pathologist, right? And a lot of people are pushing for it to be called instead a speech and language pathologist because language oftentimes gets kind of forgotten or not talked about. So I want to kind of break down what a speech goal is and what a language goal is, because Rosa Parks is language based, right? So we don't really care about their speech that much. And a huge reason for that is because one, the lab is about language, so speech data isn't going to be helping us at all. And the other part is that a lot of kids that are in preschool are going to have speech problems, and they're normal speech problems, right? So as language and speech develop, there are going to be errors, right? So a lot of kids won't learn how to pronounce R until they're, 6, 7, 8. And so it's normal for a 3 or 4-year-old to not be able to pronounce R. It's also normal for them to have certain phonological processes, such as final consonant deletion. I don't know if you've heard about this in any of your classes, but final consonant deletion is where you don't include the last consonant of a word. So if I'm talking about a pen, I would say pe. If I'm talking about a book, I would say bu. And they're consistently deleting, like not saying the last sound of a word. that's normal in preschool. It's not normal in elementary school. And so at this point in their life, because they're still developing their speech, and because we have a lot of bilingual speakers that have some language differences right now, it's not necessarily a speech disorder. It's just they're learning a new language, and sometimes sounds are pronounced a little bit differently. It's just something that we can't really focus on at this point, because so many of the errors are normal, and yeah, it's hard to tease out. So a speech goal is how a word sounds when a child says them, right? So leaving out sounds, like I just mentioned, final consonant deletion, or also clusters. So if you have a word like broom, sometimes the child will pronounce it as boom, right? They won't include the R, or they might say like boom with a W, because like I said, R develops much later. Switching sounds, that's where you would use like a W for R. Adding sounds in, that's something like ducky, doggy, horsey, right? So the E at the end isn't necessary or even correct, but the child is adding that in because it makes the sound easier, and because that's usually the model that parents and teachers give, just growing up. And so it takes them a while to understand that that's kind of like baby speech, and then they'll do it correctly in elementary school. Um, you may see a pattern. This is what I meant by like final consonant deletion, is that it's consistently happening on every word. They're leaving out the last sound. Or cluster reduction on every single word. If there's two sounds next to each other, consonant sounds, they're not going to say it. Like flower, they might say fower. And that's like a pattern, and that's a normal pattern, right, for a preschooler. I think that it's great to observe that this is happening, because this going to Rosa Parks is a great learning opportunity for you all, to get exposed to speech and language before most of you probably are wanting to go to grad school, not all of you, but a lot of you, as you go to grad school, a lot of peers in your cohort will never have really worked with kids in this setting before. So it's a good thing to note, but I don't think it's something that you need to focus on, because we don't really care how the child is saying it. We just care what the child is saying. And so that takes me into language. So this is what we are focusing on at Rosa Parks. And this is grammar, types of words, types of sentences, number of words, how they're putting words together, understanding versus saying, and reading versus conversation. So grammar is how words are put together in a sentence. So including prefixes and suffixes, and having words in the correct order. So say like the dog wants to go outside versus the dog outside wants to go. Like that's not correct. And so we want to make sure that they're using correct grammar. One thing that I briefly mentioned on the last slide was language differences. So if a child is learning English for the first time, or Spanish for the first time for that matter, in the bilingual classes, the grammatical structure of different languages can differ. And so sometimes a kid will, as they're learning a language, have to adjust to the grammatical structure of their second language, but they're used to the grammatical structure of their first language. So there might be some errors as they're learning, and that's normal. And as they continue to improve their second language, those errors will decrease. So when you're testing for like a language disorder, you want to test in both languages, because if you have errors in the second language but not in the first, it's just like they're learning. But if you have errors in both, then that's indicative of a disorder. Types of words. So if a child is only saying nouns, or only like a specific set of verbs, like up, 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 right? Then you want to kind of expand their vocabulary, right? So that is sometimes a goal, is expanding vocabulary with different types of words. So if they only have nouns and they don't have any adjectives or any verbs, then you'll want to start incorporating more of those and kind of giving them support that way. Different types of sentences. So a child sometimes may only use a comment sentence like, or a requesting sentence like, I want milk, okay? But they're not going to use like a negative sentence like, I don't want milk. Or they might be saying, they might not be asking questions. And so that could be a type of therapy, is integrating different types of sentences. Number of words we've talked about. If they're only saying like 1 or 2 words, we want to expand that to like 3 or 4. How they're putting words together, that kind of goes along with the grammar thing we talked about. Understanding versus saying. So this is a difference between receptive, understanding, and expressive, which is saying. So a lot of the times you're going to understand a lot more than you can say. And I'm sure if you've ever taken a foreign language, you guys have experienced this yourself. I sign, and I pretty much, if somebody signs to me, I can understand what they're saying. But if I'm signing, like, I can get my point across, but sometimes it's not the most clear, the most grammatically correct. I might not know a word here or there because I've never learned that word before. But if somebody else used that word to sign, I could understand what the word is because I understood the rest of the sentence and the context of our conversation. And so I'm able to use my context clues to learn, like, oh, okay, like, I know the word for shoe, but I don't know the word for boot, okay? And so if somebody specifically is saying boot, then and they're talking about winter shoes, and then they sign the sign for boot, then I would understand, right? And so it's the same way for these kids, is that they're usually going to understand more than they can say. And that's normal, but we want to try and catch them up. So by providing a rich language environment with lots of vocabulary, lots of different kinds of words, using all the language facilitation strategies, first of all, you're going to give them more stuff to understand, but second of all, the more they hear it, then they're going to eventually be able to say it, right? So if you hear a word enough times, then if I see the word boot 6 times, then I'm going to eventually learn that word. And if I'm having a conversation about boots, I can remember, like, oh yeah, like I heard that word 6 times in that conversation that one time, and I can sign that word. And then finally, reading versus conversation. At this age, conversation is a lot easier for them because they're still learning how to read. And so for reading, you're going to be focusing on their like phonemic awareness. So pairing the alphabet with sounds. And then once they have those mixed together, then you can pair the sounds with the alphabetic things and words and start working on sounding out words. And then a lot of students will start learning like sight words once they're in kindergarten. And so usually at this age, students are starting to learn to read a little bit. They usually can spell out their own name. And it's just a matter of practicing, like, oh yeah, like, you know that the C makes the k, 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 A makes ah, 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 and T makes t, t, t. Let's mix it together. K, ah, cot, cat, cat. That's a cat, right? And so it's just a different type of language, right? It's both language, but conversation is going to come easier and more fluidly for them usually, and then reading is like they're learning. So even though it's language, it's definitely not their primary mode of language. It's something that they need extra support on. But again, that's something that's normal for a preschooler, so it's not something that we're necessarily going to be focusing on. So hopefully that clears up some questions that you guys might have, even if you didn't know you had questions about it. I know that happens to me all the time. Like, I think I know what's going on, and then somebody says something and I'm like, oh wait, I guess I didn't know that. So hopefully now you guys can understand a little bit more the difference between speech and language, and that we're focusing on language at Rosa Parks. And a lot of our therapy is about language. Majority of my therapy at my placement this fall is about language. I have 3 Artic groups, 2 fluency groups, and 15 language groups. So hopefully you guys can see the difference there. Oh shoot, my computer's about to die, so I'll wrap this up quickly. If you guys have any questions, reach out to me, reach out to your coaches. Assignments this week. We're all done with videos, scripts, and crafts, but if you want or need extra hours, so if you've had to miss some small group meetings, or you missed an assignment earlier this semester, then you can do an extra assignment to make up for that. You can also go to our JEDI meetings. We have them about once per month, so we should have one in November and December if you want to attend those. They're hosted by Grad Nisla, and they're really great resources for learning about topics that you might not learn about in class. It supplements your learning and just gives you more insight into marginalized communities that obviously as a cisgender white female, I don't have all the insight in the world, and so it's really nice to be able to hear about different populations and hear different perspectives of people in the community that you're going to be working with, because I think it helps make you be more understanding and empathetic. But there are two things due this week. So there is a short article, 10 Principles of Grammatical Intervention. So that's going to be about grammar intervention, which we talked a little bit about language. Hopefully that'll give you some more insight into that. And then we do have a goal project where you guys are going to practice reading and writing your own goals, kind of like we did earlier in this slide with Sophia and Jose, I think they were named. Who knows? Sophie and Juan. Sophie and Juan. All right, I am all out of battery, so I appreciate you guys joining me. You guys are amazing. You're working hard. I'm proud of you. Only a couple weeks left. We're almost to Thanksgiving, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.